we are going to jump in though to our second session, and I'm going to let Mark get into this.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and let me start by introducing Charles Yudd, Deputy County Administrator. I think pretty much everybody.
He's new in the job, is that right?
Yeah,
Barely.
His first day.
So, and let me just say a huge thank you to Charles for this. I mean, he is got the zoning ordinance rewrite, a whole bunch of other things, and is very busy as we've been kind of coordinating on this a little bit. So really appreciate you taking the time. And we're going to talk today a little bit about the county's water and wastewater program. Now, you've heard us bring this up over the last few years a couple different times. You've heard our perspective, but what we thought would be interesting is to really hear it from the county's perspective. It's their program. We play a role in it, but we thought it'd be a little different twist on it and share some of that. So as we've been talking here over the last couple of weeks, and I was going to introduce the topic.
Hey, before you get started on that,
Yes.
we also want to thank Charles for everything he's done for Loudon Water over the years,
Very much.
especially getting through that tough time that we had a few years ago. I certainly really appreciate it because we were certainly going in the wrong direction with that. We really appreciate it here at Loudon Water.
Thank you. Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Much appreciated.
So I had written down a few notes, but in kind of getting a glimpse of what Charles is going to go through, I think he's covering it. So I'm going to leave that for him. The one thing I'll kind of give a reminder in terms of the water and wastewater program for reference, I put a map up here. One of the real critical things is to remember, you've heard this term bypass community. Bypass communities are some of the older areas of Loudoun County that were built prior to our system being. So Broad Run Farms, some of these areas are good examples where if they were to get into this program to get connected, need a solution, our central system is the natural solution for it. And that makes sense. So as you hear more about this again, in the rural policy area, you have some of these communities of need. We have a role. We help with the study and feasibility and understanding what that is. We may or may not be the solution. Likely, a lot of them we are if it's a community system, but some of them, the end result could be that doing repairs to wells and septics, and then we're out of it. So there's just a big difference between those two areas, and I think you'll continue to see that. Much of the projects are in the rural policy area. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Charles, and then we'll go through stuff, and we'll have some time for some question and answer as well.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to the board for having me today. It really is my pleasure to be here. I have enjoyed working with the organization over the years. Many times for some reason, if there was a problem somewhere or a communication glitch or some big thing to get over, somehow those things wind up with me. And it's not because I ask for it or am particularly inclined to go look for trouble, but I've always been really interested in solutions and trying to find a way to work together. And so with that spirit in mind, that this discussion on what we call the Community Water and Wastewater Program, for short, Water and Wastewater Program, it's really a pleasure to come and talk about it. And you can see this first slide here. The 2007 timeframe is generally what we refer to as the start of it. And I think at the time, the Board of Supervisors and the county administrator, who was Mr. Bowers at the time, realized that there was a need for a more detailed or systematic approach to solving issues related to various communities, because those issues kept coming up, whether it was through other projects, from other departments throughout the organization, or just being in touch with the community and having your ears open and your eyes open and listening to what might be going on in certain communities. Because these communities are smaller and they're not your large scale planned unit developments in the suburban area. There's people that live there. And so it's a smaller universe of impacted people. But when I say 2007, and we refer to that as the start, there really were many other initiatives that occurred through cooperation and collaboration between the county and Loudon Water. And I just wanted to name a few, like one of our reports had some records from many, many years ago. The St. Louis sewerage system, board discussion of this in starting in 1969, and then many actions and steps to bring sewer to that community through the 70s and 80s. The Aldi sewerage system, starting in 84, all the way through to the late 90s. Broad Run Farms, wastewater utility extension, discussions with then LCS Board of Directors, 1984. Extension of wastewater utility from Hamilton to urban growth area, 1995. So many of these things impacting Loudon Water Service go back many, many years, but a real focus on some of the other communities around the county and the beginning of this particular program around 2007. Then 2011, the needs assessment document was done, and that was the overview of 36 communities. And there was discussion of observations of conditions in those communities and the very beginnings of what to do about solutions for those communities. I will tell you, right about that time, that is when the Raspberry folks showed up in for some reason, again, in my office, two ladies from Raspberry. And the issues that they were describing were ones of concerns about health and the fact that their water source came from wells. And there was a lot of discussion about, could there be some sort of health issue? And the general perception was, well, no, but we do know that of the wells that serve that area, there had been instances where they were under the influence of surface water. And so that was one of the first steps that led to many years of discussion. But around that same time that those people were in my office, again, for some reason, they showed up there. And many, many years of effort ensued. In fact, changes like Mark talked about resulted. But they came to me and said, hey, look, we're in the needs assessment. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where are you showing up in the needs assessment? And so the needs assessment just noted that there were concerns in that community because of the well being under the influence or under impacted by surface water. But that was a key recognition, as an example, by one group saying, hey, we're in the needs assessment, you need to do something. Well, there were 35 other communities in the needs assessment as well. Great document and provided sort of a roadmap forward. That roadmap forward resulted in several steps by the Board of Supervisors. One, in 2012, we brought the work plan to them to start this whole effort. And that's where they recognized that this was a good thing to do and really were giving the county staff the direction to proceed. As the years went on after the 2012 work plan, we also had direction to work on a variety of work plan products. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of those that really impacted the relationship that we have with Loudon Water and how we began to do the work. And so there was a process that needed to be identified, because if you can imagine, if you are talking to decision makers about what could be 36 major projects, you need to start somewhere and you need to be able to prioritize. And part of that process was to look at the needs assessment to develop some measures of prioritizing what project first and how to move forward, and then how to work well with our partners here at Loudon Water. That big step was an MOU that was approved that became effective in June of 2015. And it laid out how we would all work together. And then also in those work plan products, there were policies regarding bypass communities. And that was what Mark was mentioning earlier. If you can do you think you can flip back to the map for a second? The blue, from a utility planning perspective, the blue almost makes it easy, because from the county's point of view, we are expecting the central system to serve all of those properties in that area. But from a practical day-to-day implementation perspective, there may be developments that were built well before others, and those others that came later brought the utilities, and the development decisions that led to service to the larger new communities didn't include serving people nearby that might have on-site systems from years and years ago. So we did need a means to work through that and recognize that. And there were a couple of things I just want to mention I found in some of the records. We would continue to support current requirements to minimize the risk of on-site water and wastewater system failures in existing communities. That is a public health and safety perspective, that we would want to not see people be in danger or not continue to be experience negative impact in any way. The county staff would work with the health department staff and Loudon Water to be aware of system failures and try and figure out what can you do to work with property owners and let them know, hey, you might have an issue here. And then always look for solutions in the development process itself. If there's another project nearby or a redevelopment project, awareness for all parties to try and look for solutions that the development process itself may help solve, but you can't rely on it in and of itself. Just more of an observation of deliberate policy work to help guide steps forward. The green part of the map is more challenging because of the county's planning policies really not supporting the extension of the central system beyond those hard edge policy lines between the blue and the green. Many times I've spoken to either this group or representatives of Loudon Water to talk about the challenges with utility policy planning in the creation of the transition area, which is included in the blue right now. Initially, it did not have, it was not planned for central extension. And we realized if there was a whole bunch more communal systems and they had to survive on their own, that probably wouldn't be the best solution. So after the transition area was adopted as a policy area by the board, they came back later, a board came back later to allow the extension of central utilities in the transition area. And some of the, I certainly don't take credit for any of the decisions that were made over time, but I will say that when you make a decision and you don't experience any problems, you've made a good decision, because had you experienced the problems that would have happened, that would have been a bad decision. And so we don't really hear a lot about problems of central being extended into the transition area. And for the most part, the density stayed exactly the same as planned long ago. So, quite an interesting situation. So if you can go back to the slide I was coming up to. 2015 timeframe, the prioritization manual came into being, and the board also spent a lot of time looking at funding policies. So again, if you just realized what 2015 looked like, we were moving forward with a lot of data center development, and our revenue picture was really changing. But up until that point, our revenues that might be available for capital projects were always limited, and we always were struggling to go to the state and look for money for example, transportation projects. And the idea that we would have to start funding or establishing a fund for these types of projects was a realization, and it's led to the annual funding of about $2.5 million into the water and wastewater project every year. And then in our current CIP that goes out 6 years, that funding continues. That's a great resource to draw from when we're in the planning stages. And then if that can be leveraged at times into projects, that's a great thing. I mentioned the MOU earlier, and then the first open application period occurred in 2016. Next slide. What's interesting about the applications that come in is that they are reviewed for eligibility based on those criteria that you see right there. First, there is a concern out there that's already been identified that there's interest from the majority of the property owners, and we're looking for 60% of their 60% of the property owner's signature. Less than that is a little bit difficult depending on how you move forward, and probably a good measure to not move forward. Enough information about the case to review and make cogent decisions, mapping the area so you know where the community is, and not just the geographic location, but the limits of the location, because things change as you leave a project's boundary and enter into other areas that might be adjacent. I think one of the neatest examples about community boundary, and you'll see it in one of my subsequent slides, is the community of the Marches in the transition area. It's located along Braddock Road, and it's just maybe if you go back to the map, Mark, I'm sorry to jump around. It's down along, but it is in the Braddock Road corridor. You might want to just show generally where that is. Transition area, then the far western reaches, I think, might be crossing into the rural area, but right about where Mark had the red dot. Originally developed on-site systems, 3-acre minimum, and then a project was developed next door that was served by a separate freestanding communal system. But then that project next door was able to take advantage of, years later, being located in an area where the central system could be extended. So if you had a communal system with a distribution, with a collection and sewage collection and water distribution system already built there, you could switch over to the central system pretty easy. But that's not the case for the Marches, being a community that's served by on-site well and septic with no distribution system. But right next door, and now as years have passed, all around, the central system serves that area. So there's always an interesting sort of chronology and history of what happens first, and that leaves you in sort of a planning paradigm to sort of untangle and figure out how to go forward. You can go catch up with my slides. So here we are with program status updates. And so you can see, and have they had a briefing on this from you all recently, or would it be helpful to go through?
While.
the marches?
No,
Well-
just the status of which projects are out there. Been a little while.
Yeah.
It's probably been a little while.
Okay, so here is a relatively current status update. And I have 3 different slides. One that is projects that have gone through the program, other ones that were a little bit before that, and then other similar communities of need that have had assistance. And so I'll work through all of that. So first is Hillsborough. The town really rallied to figure out their own utility issues. Were very much involved, the mayor and vice mayor, hands-on, the two of them. I don't think there's really much staff in Hillsborough, but they did come to visit us a lot. And they're on their way to having a great improvement, including the transportation improvements to Route 9 along the way. Paonian Springs, you can see we have a column there that's dwellings, that number of dwellings not exactly matching existing parcels, but you get a magnitude of the number of built structures out there, and what the total impact to folks that may have a house out there. Feasibility study, yes.
Took a tour, a couple of years ago on a bus. One of our, I think, and many of those units, while they're not on their lot lines, they're very close. It's
Yeah.
very dense.
It's ARPA funded.
American Rescue Planning, it was the COVID-related federal funding.
Yeah,
We call it ARPA.
I think in Peonia, I think they share. Some of the neighbors share.
Yeah.
Either
Share.
wells or share.
Share wells, they share septic.
Yeah.
Some of it ends up on the surface on it.
So again, the development pattern from years ago, small lots, very much from a planning perspective, we do consider it a rural village. And the conditions, such close proximity of well and septic is probably not a good thing, and something needs to be done. I'm gonna speak about like the connection between Paonian Springs and Waterford in a second, because I think there's some really interesting planning issues that we need to touch on. But I mentioned the marches earlier, then the village of Aldi and the Aldi Water Company. There is a very limited water system out there and an old water tower. And the staff has been coordinating with each other and with whoever will help us, including folks here on the on plans to help upgrade that system and have the tank be replaced. Waterford is served by a sewage system, and I mentioned that earlier. It goes back many, many years. But the idea of trying to find a solution for water, for a water distribution system, they're right in the planning and preliminary work right now. And so I just want to take, and then I'll just mention Unison and finish the slide and then talk about the connection between Paonian and Waterford. There's a feasibility study completed for Unison, and then there's always a great deal of community engagement with all of these projects where you go and talk to property owners, residents, and
What are you talking to them about their options and what the options will cost? Is that
I think a full-fledged conversation of their observations of the issues, what they experience. Do you share a well with your neighbor? Are there any problems? What happens? And then how solutions are developed, mainly in the feasibility stage. And then from there, if you want to do this, there's a variety of options to do this. How will funding be identified? So I think it's pretty much the full range of discussion with community representatives, and it's ongoing and it's iterative in terms of from this point. Now we have this. Now that we have this much information, let's share that and then build to move forward. And I think you might have some more comments.
Well, the
about that.
feasibility studies.
I mean, you wouldn't do a feasibility study if someone wanted something done. There must have been a problem, right? There must
Well,
have been
it
an
goes
issue.
back to the beginning where at least the majority, at least 60% of that
Okay.
community had to sign on saying, we're interested, we think we have an issue.
And the
Into this,
reason
we
they
wanna
into
do
this
that.
program.
in this program.
Yeah, many have complained to the Board of Supervisors,
The
but
county has funding available for at least a minimum of 2 feasibility studies a year. We perform the feasibility studies for that. And then in this case, it is all of those issues that engagement happens. And the funding there might be opportunities for funding from the county particularly, but they have to go through a survey process. And they have to kind of fit a profile, socioeconomic issues.
Right.
Or the other possibility is that if they want to move forward in this, it may be some way that it is going to cost them. And so those are the beginning of those
can
kinds
be
of
a tax
conversations.
district or something, yeah.
So is the feasibility, is it feasible to connect the central system? Is it feasible to do an on-site plan?
What I was gonna ask.
Yeah, I think.
What are the options
What are the-
when you're out in like a Paonian Springs or?
Right, so the connecting to central is
It's
not.
not
part
an
of the
option, yeah.
feasibility study. It's
That's
can
not
something be
feasible.
done on your property in your individual,
Or do you need a
or
community
do you
system?
need a communal
Okay.
system?
Right, kind of like
And then-
Raspberry.
Like
Yeah.
Raspberry.
And then if you're gonna
Bad
look at,
example,
if it's a for sewer, we start looking at whether it's subsurface discharge versus
Okay.
discharge, surface discharge.
All these locations, these are all community initiated. They're the ones who
Right.
reached out and said, we have an issue.
They apply to
They
the
applied,
program.
yes. to the program.
So let me just take a minute and talk about the Paonian Springs Waterford connection, because it does get to some of the questions that you're raising. Because we have these very distinct policy areas where I guess the best way to say it is in the green, you wouldn't see the central system extending. Then your options there are options in the rural area, but they're limited. And so we have a number of towns, and the towns have their own systems. And so we do have policies that allow for a municipal system to extend beyond the limits of the municipality to serve an area where there might be a public health risk. That is, that's the policies governing that are very, very tight for good reason, because as the municipal systems extend out into the rural area, there is the potential for, I think, some development issues to arise. Is the density really appropriate to be served by a municipal system? And of course, we have planned for many years for low density rural type development in the rural area. So the thing I wanted to share today is that in looking at Paonian Springs and Waterford as 2 rural villages, I looked back, and it does involve me, so it is a little bit complicated. And those of you that were following along the discussion that we had with the board, there was reference to the staff that we have in the Department of General Services reaching out to me and to the Department of Planning and Zoning for a position on what type of policy options can you come up with to help drive a solution. And so for many, many years, I could say generations, our policy documents have called for communal systems in the rural area. But the idea that the customer served by the individual communal system would be responsible for the long-term maintenance of that and the cost associated with it, that's a problem. And so that was a problem that landed on the board's lap here, and you dealt with it. But I think you still need to be careful with communal systems every which way but loose. You need to have them located and developed in a responsible way. And so could a communal system that serves a village connect to another village? And that was the concept of a inter-village connection. which we do feel is absolutely allowable by policies within our general plan.
The cost is arguably lower than building two.
Well, for a couple different, yes, and for a couple different reasons. Ironically, or perhaps not ironically, but land is expensive. So if you need to acquire land for example, subsurface treatment like drain fields around Paonian Springs, you need to be able to find it. And then if you did find it, it would
Gotta buy
likely
it.
be really expensive.
Mm.
And Waterford has for example, sewage system. They are also well underway for their feasibility study for a water distribution system from wells around that area. Could you connect? And the answer is yes. So that is a bit of innovation. I will just say it's super complicated. If any of you want to get into that, then we can talk about it if you have questions. But it's something that I think the county needs to be very, very careful with, because a misapplication of the policy, like extension of municipal or extension of central, really could start to unwind the underpinnings of the land use strategy. So it is something that's tightly built, probably a good reason for it. But having that great partnership with Loudon Water and being able to communicate exactly how the policies work has been absolutely invaluable. And so I think I said it last year and I'll say it again this year, the staff that you have, including all of those right there, absolutely terrific, because we are able to stay on point by point. How can we be helpful to each other, but know that you're navigating through our complicated policies that are longstanding, have been challenged, will continue to be challenged probably somehow. And today, to this day, we're working on language in the draft zoning ordinance about utility extensions in the policy areas that are appropriate per policy, but where those regulations actually can be helpful to both organizations. Yes.
I would just add a couple of quick comments on this to kind of from the Loudon Water perspective. So one of the challenges that you're saying is the service areas will still be the villages. You have, in a sense, public infrastructure going through the rural policy area that through properties that won't connect. That's a challenge. That's going to really be a policy challenge for the county to continue and how that's defined. I think you were kind of commenting on that. I think the other thing, you brought up the cost. For us, where we have a lot at this, the county and or the community is covering the capital cost of all of this. But we then are running these. And so we have the long-term O&M costs. And if we're looking at connecting to, we have only one plan versus two in these communities, that's generally instinctively, I'd say that's a good thing for us. So, I mean, that's where I think we're trying to be very coordinated on this. And this is a good development in this case.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a question, and you were talking about the towns, and you probably don't know the answer, but I live in Lovettsville. I'm on well and septic. I'm outside the town. But I know there are houses that are outside the town, they're in the county, that are connected to their system. Is that a county town decision?
There were several instances since the early 2000s where decisions were made to extend, and they were for mitigation of health risk.
Okay.
And then also, if there is ever a public facility immediately adjacent to a town boundary, the public facility can be served. So there are individual circumstances, but again, very tightly crafted language to preclude, what would be major extensions out into the rural area. And please know that the questions have been asked. Could I go from Hillsborough to Percival as a municipal?
We've heard that one.
Yeah, right.
So another key thing that Mark mentioned is just that, those policy constraints. And when I say it's complicated, imagine, if you will, you're a property owner in the intervening area between Paonian Springs and Waterford, and you are asked to grant an easement but you could not take advantage of it. Well, it's,
No.
I don't know how I would feel about
Yeah,
it, but,
Of course, connect to it is a connection fee, so.
well, and it's not even, I don't think we could even help them connect to it because they're not in those village areas. They're somewhere else in the rural area. So that's something to be mindful of and maybe help with a solution. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the policies have to be limiting. They can be helpful and you can come up with great solutions like I think we're coming up with for Paonian and Waterford, but they also have to be limiting because if they're not limiting, then it becomes more wide open for more expansive
Now, why
service.
why wouldn't a homeowner, unless it was a forced sewer main, be able to connect to that sewer just because they're in the rural policy area and you're not letting them?
Yes,
Yes.
policy.
Oh, so it's not physical,
No.
it's policy.
It's policy.
But they have to sign an easement.
Well, yeah.
Well, they're being asked to sign an easement. So you remember all and it's still going on about putting the fire station across the road into the transition area. And we wanted to give them water and sewer, and it became an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it was, how did that ever get resolved?
There, well, do you mean, where do you mean?
The Evergreen Mill.
Evergreen Mill. Yeah.
Oh, if you're immediately adjacent to a policy boundary, you could be served if you're public use.
And that's what.
Okay.
Okay, the
Yeah.
fire station. But the property owners next to it wanted to get access and they could not. So it was very,
Right, and those things are long debated at great detail. And you have to have a hard edge, I think, is the answer after.
have to have a, that's a. good
I
point.
believe
Yeah.
it's the right answer. If not, your rural area might not look like your rural area today.
So in this study in Peony, not Peony Springs, but in Waterford, they're talking about, having to tear up the ground to put in the pipes, right? So there's another group that wants to, while you're doing that, why don't you bury the overhead power line?
Yes,
So there's a lot of other complications that come out around it.
yes.
Those waterfront people.
By connecting,
People.
by connecting these areas, aren't you slowing?
Have water, don't want to pay for those that don't.
You're not with the communal systems or communal connections, because there's no commensurate increase in density. There's no change in the underlying zoning or any of the policies that call for low density in the rural area. The issue is if the central system extended, the cost to do that on a large scale would probably need the policy area to change from what it is right now. And so that is debated right along the boundary to this day. And so I do think as I leave the county and others come on board, it'll be
No,
You can't leave.
no, it will be a continuing debate. And it's actually not illogical because the supply of land is constrained. And if the demand continues, then the pressure to replan will be there. So it's best to just know these things as you move forward. I think maybe as Mark said, a good solution, the central extension is always a good solution, but there's so much at play from the county's perspective with regard to our land use strategy. And so it's, again, another great way to work together. If we're sharing that information and Law and Water is sharing the technical constraints, what can and can't be done, then both of us knowing where each other's coming from makes for a great solution. And that's what these projects are. So if you just can go to wherever I was. I think I passed there. So then there are some other projects that are just supported by the same type of program, the Broad Run Farms and the EPA Hidden Lane issue and involvement from Loudon Water in the county brings potable water to portions of Broad Run Farms.
That was an easy one though, wasn't it? I mean, okay.
In
if you drink
retrospect.
this water, you're going to die. I mean,
In retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't about land use. It was about,
It was easy for those people, because there was people around.
Yeah,
that-
right.
Exactly right. That was that was the
Gray area.
challenge, is that
Okay.
the EPA established a hard line
Yep.
and said, if you're on
That's right,
this
you
side,
told
it's
us
a
that,
real issue.
yeah.
If you're on this side of the line,
You're
no
fine.
worries.
It's 20 feet away. It's
Yeah.
fine.
You believe that?
The water's orange, but it's fine.
The water doesn't leak
Not if I
anywhere.
look at
That's right.
I'd want to hook to Central.
So very complicated, and any engagement, I think, being frank, any engagement with the federal government takes time and patience, and you got to really weave through it. But the county staff and your staff work together continuously. And I think the evidence of good collaboration is there in that project too, because there is a solution.
And we
The-
coordinated the project that is outside of the federal project. We finished design, and technically we could have moved forward, but it didn't make sense. So we kind of coordinated with county staff saying, it makes sense, let's just put this on ice, and the whole project all happening at once. There's a lot of efficiency with that, so it makes sense.
What's the timing of that?
The EPA is working on easements. And I think the latest update we heard is maybe by the end of this year. I think that they think they could be getting into next year, could be ready to bid the project. I think that's the latest. Do you remember anything different?
So construction's maybe sometime mid next year, something like that.
So what are they doing for water now? Do we have temporary lines in there? Is it like right now, what are they?
Basically, they're on individual wells, and the ones that are in that zone, the EPA, the federal government has filtration systems in individual homes, and they actually monitor and maintain those.
I thought we put water lines in there all over the place.
Sewer, we have sewer in there.
You're thinking the other one that we did.
Yeah, what's the other one that we were doing?
Potomac.
Oh, okay, mixing them up. Got it.
What's the timing of Waterford and Paonian Springs?
I got a couple of questions there too.
Charles is going, that's not gonna be my problem.
Well,
The 2 years out maybe? or-
I think there's a couple things. The ARPA funding, which is for much of the design, which was there's some, that's pushing some of that to get the design going. The siting and location of, say, the wells and where that centrally located water treatment plant would be. That's kind of a combination between us. I think we're doing some of the technical work, but that's ultimately going to be a county-run project in terms of the acquisition of that. But I think that process will be over the next couple of years.
We have one of the task items coming forward on CIP next month.
Yes, keep your business.
But so the land hasn't been acquired yet, so we would need to acquire land and the county would be acquiring it. So you guys gotta find that, buy it, and then we gotta build the thing. So it's.
I hear there's a landfill site that's available.
Yeah, multiple years.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah.
So is Paonian how desperate are they? I mean, when I was on the sewer committee in Hamilton, we had homes with like actual sewage sitting in their backyard because the drain fields were so saturated. And so I don't have a sense for how dire the situation is.
But I don't think Paonian Springs has been designated anything, say by the Commonwealth, like that that is putting it in a category where it's sort of, again, costs are covered. So I don't think it's in that way officially. I don't think there's that urgency that it has to be done. It's not considered a health. No, it's not defined that way, but that's kind of outside of our.
Not like Raspberry where they had the fecal coliforms in the water, or that we're not.
So, Luckett, you didn't talk much about.
I didn't. I'm not there. I got
Okay.
stopped.
Oh, it's, you're almost gotten into lunch, so.
Okay, so Luckett's, this really came about with the change from the volunteer firefighter facility to the county's constructed station. And so when we moved our fire and rescue operations into our new building, the public use of the existing fire and rescue, volunteer fire and rescue facility ceased. And so that is an issue because when you make a change like that, you are you're impacting the other public facilities, the community center, the elementary school, who have been served by a individual system right there. And so this is looking at more of a service area, but a really small service area just to serve 4 or 5 facilities. At the same time, just recently, the board has initiated a planning study for Luckett's, and who knows where that'll go, that there's more area than just those limited public facilities that might benefit from a system. But then you sort of get into capacity of the existing system. So
Across the streets,
That-
high density neighborhood.
yeah. So what happens when those land uses change? Do you need to plan for some sort of utility solution? That's probably separate, but what happens sometimes is the planning steps don't always happen first, and other events happen first. And so that's on the list for a project to look into. It is complicated for the volunteer company because they are the owner of the building. And full disclosure, my son's a volunteer firefighter from Luckett's, so I hear all about it.
But you do.
I do. Next slide, and I think this might be my last one, so I'm wrapping up quick. These are projects, impactful projects that we refer to as pre-program, but have really made a difference for the property owners. Howardsville is a wastewater community system. Phase 1 is complete, has 2 connections. Phase 2 will come later after more flow data is available. I can't begin to tell you how closely our staff worked with Loudon Water. And I do have a quick quote. I told Mark I would bring a quote from one of our board members, and here it comes. This is from Chair Randall, and it's about Howardsville. It was unacceptable to me that Loudon citizens were living or perhaps merely surviving without running water and indoor bathroom facilities. I was so pleased that Carla, Mark, and everyone at Loudon Water shared my desire to take care of some of our most vulnerable citizens. In addition, Loudon Water has kept me and the Board of Supervisors briefed on the progress. Mr. Thomas Reed, affectionately called Bubbles, was an entirely new man after he received a bathroom and running water. He literally looked 10 years younger and he smiled. I can't thank you all enough for caring. That's a quote directly from our board chair, who was directly involved in talking to community residents. And that's the reaction and that's the solution. And man, if that's not doing what you need to do, that's it.
It's been 8 years to do it.
Yeah, it did, took a long time. And I do think that the fact that solutions took a long period of time, they took a long time for Willisville also, similar situation, really gave strength to development of the community water and wastewater program, that we have a process in place to deal with these things. And if a property owner resident came and spoke to any one of us, any member here, any member of your staff, someone at the county, we would say, okay, I hear you, and here's a place to go. Here's a place to take your concern and a process that we have to deal with these issues. Whereas before, things might have lingered for a long time. That's not to say projects don't take a long time. A project might not get prioritized over another, but there is a place to go. And so I think I'll end there and take whatever questions you have for me.
I think with Howardsville, just a question. I think phase 2 is, there are undeveloped lots, if I remember. Is that?
I would say a better description of phase 1 and phase 2 is phase 1 was the collection system,
Okay.
bringing it to a central, basically a holding tank. And then phase 2 will be an actual treatment plant. But it was very difficult because it's such low flow to know what's the right treatment.
Right.
And the right level. We needed information on how much capacity, how much volume there's going to be. So for the residents, they won't see a difference. They're flushing the
They're fine.
toilet and
Yeah.
it's gone. It's considered kind of a pump and haul. But it really is just a central holding tank, and we have to send a truck out once a week, or I don't even know if it's that often, so.
I guess
Those three are successes.
yes, Tall Oaks went on for a long
Yeah.
period of time, different type of situation, different type of
Yeah,
community, but
Oh, yeah.
impactful to the property owners nonetheless, and solution occurred.
Yep.
So any tough questions for me?
Why are you retiring? We want you to
Why?
stay. We want you to stay.
Enough is enough. I've been with the county for 20
I know,
years.
I know, but you've made a real positive impact, and many people know that.
Appreciate
Really have.
it. My pleasure.
I was gonna ask if that was the zoning ordinance you brought there, but
No, it's not. No, it's like-
No, that's a,
his comments on the zoning.
that's a perfect thing.
yeah,
That's just his water book.
yeah.
Yeah, I started this binder in, I think, 2014. I just found it the other day fortuitously, and there's a lot of great information. And I think that just the ability to like share info with the two organizations. I have one more quote, and that is from Scott Fincham, who's one of our project staff members in the Department of General Services, works really closely with the Loudon Water staff. He wanted me to share that the partnership is phenomenal, and the ability to trust each other. Like, you give your information, you share, you get an answer back, we're going to go with it. That it's been vetted, it's good, keep moving forward. Just an amazing partnership. And I think if you sort of let that happen organically at lower levels in an organization, that's where you really see success. And I think the last few years, we've been able to say, Mark, Carla, send this person to that person and have them meet and greet and start talking. And I think it's made a huge difference. And really, sincerely from me, I would not want to see that lost or not continued. So that's my message. And been a pleasure to work with all of you over the years.
Say one very short thing. One of the first times I met Charles was when the town of Hamilton was having litigation or threatened litigation or what. No, we did file litigation against the county. And so I sat down with Charles, we had our mayor, and I forget who else was there, but our mayor was livid. And he's just, I mean, he was not very polite. And Charles handled it so well. And I felt so bad. This is not how you work through problems, but this guy had some, anyhow, but so I really, your willingness to be patient with all of the complexities and personalities and difficulties all around all of this has gone a very long way to these types of cooperative things and the progress that's been made. So thanks for that.
Appreciate it. I remember that. That was tough.
So before we break for lunch, Mark and I just wanted to say a few words to Charles. Kudos and kudos to you for the presentation, for sure. Ditto on all of the good feedback, but I know, Mark, you had a few things you wanted to share, and then I'll wrap it up before we go to lunch.
Yeah, and we've been kind of talking about it here, so I won't go on too much, but this whole thing, like where we've gotten, I think, in the relation between the county and Loudon Water, and Mr. Coble has kind of mentioned that 2015, 2014, 15, there were some tough times. And I think we were already doing this a little bit informally, where we were coordinating a lot. And Charles always brought a lot of history and a unique background with the land use and planning. So we naturally were kind of coordinating. But through that time, you were designated officially Loudon Water's liaison. And so we've been talking a lot because we've got to find who's the next one, and that's going to be really important. But I just think over the time here, it's been very interesting. Carol and I have been meeting with you for, every monthly now for the last 5 years. We were meeting before that. And we've been through a lot of things. I think we each have a different perspective. The county operates different than we as an authority operate. We've had to learn each other a little bit. I think we've seen versions of each other a little longer ago that were kind of like, we had to, work through how we work together and fighting for our own side a little bit. I think the relationship though has now become a much better understanding, and you're able to carry that through your organization. We do the same thing. And that's why Charles mentioned about like, okay, here's an issue. Here's the two people from different departments that can actually get together. So it's not been us always doing, but others. And it's just been a great evolution and great. So we're going to miss you.
Thank you.
And so hard to follow that, but when I took over the GM job 5+ years ago, I had the opportunity to start having these meetings with Charles on a monthly basis, which I had not before. So I had not really met him or knew much about him. But what I quickly learned is that I was now meeting with somebody who was so dedicated and devoted to Loudoun County and its citizens and just always wanting to do the right thing. Always had time to talk, mentor, advise, and that is so it was so invaluable to me, getting up to speed on everything that I may not have been a part of in the past. And so from me personally, you have been an advisor, a mentor, and now you're retiring as my friend. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
So on behalf of everyone at Loudoun Water, we have a little gift.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Been a pleasure. I will be in the community if you need some old sage advice from somebody with gray hair, reach out. But I really have enjoyed it, and you've got a top-notch organization, top-notch staff. So thank you all very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Charles.
it.
Okay, lunch is served. We're gonna eat in the cafeteria or training room area like last year.
And actually the rest of the afternoon will be.
We are gonna stay in there.
Yeah.
Get
Okay.
comfy.